I'm Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and this morning I'm with councillors Colin Cross and Tony Ruth of the Independent Alliance in the parish office in Ripley. Good morning.
Good morning, Martin.
Morning, Martin.
The other day at your second public meeting, you said that you were enjoying politics much more, Tony, since you had become an independent. Why is that?
I can say what I think and say what I believe for the future of Guildford. I've been a fairly loud voice on the executive when I was there. I've often been one of the few members who spoke in public and indeed in private. I have my views. I like to express them, and I like to relay the views of my residents and indeed residents across the borough. And in a sense this all started because I didn't support the leadership in the introduction of the pop-up village. I reviewed it, I discussed it with the officers, I actually went to a pop-up village, but I couldn't support it. I didn't see that it was viable or would work, and regrettably that turned out to be the case.
So you feel you have more freedom now, is that what you're saying?
I have much more freedom. I have much more freedom to talk to people, to listen to what they say without the constraints of party politics.
But so why weren't you able to do the same whilst within the Conservative group?
Because if you have independent views and you're prepared to say them, your face doesn't fit very much.
Okay, thank you. And Colin, do you really have that much common ground with Tony? After all, your background is as a Lib Dem, Tony's as a Conservative. Tony voted in favour of the local plan, including the Wisley development, which obviously you're very much against. What are your areas of disagreement?
Well, there may be a number of areas that Tony and I have differences of opinion, but I don't think that's fundamentally a problem, because we are basically a broad church of individuals, and we don't have a whipping system, so Tony may well have been influenced by the whipping on when he was voting on the council decision to go forward with the plan. But no, that's correct. I disagree with the development of Wisley for very basic reasons of the lack of sustainability of the site and the lack of the infrastructure.
Okay, but Tony, what's your position on Wisley now?
Well, I can see that as part of a local plan and housing need, Wisley is still a prospect. When I voted for the local plan, I think, been the lead councillor for housing, and housing has always been one of my passions. We need it. We desperately need affordable housing.
So you might still vote in favour of a Wisley development depending on the proposal?
I might. It will really depend upon the housing need assessment. The housing need seems to have gone down, and also the space available for housing, particularly in the town centre, has gone up, because the council leadership has now decided it's not a retail-led development.
Okay, and we ought to be clear that when we're talking about whipping, we're not talking about formal whipping, we're talking more about influence and persuasion.
Correct.
Okay. Now, are you against any Greenbelt development, Colin? Or if it was in another area, might you vote in favour of it?
That's a difficult one, Martin. I think one has to be a bit realistic about the numbers, but what happened, you saw at the latest planning discussions with the inspector, was that we've ended up with now something near a 40% buffer, which I find to be totally unrealistic, really, and I think we're fiddling the figures in effect, just to suit certain people. And if you take that 40%, that's over 4,000 homes. What also wasn't taken into account was the increase in housing in the town centre, so you could be looking at the best part of 5,000 surplus homes. Well, you can do a lot in terms of changing the requirement in the Green Belt.
Because if you vote in favour of something like Gosden or Blackwell Farm, you're going to fall out with some of your colleagues, aren't you?
Yeah. I think in the end there may be difficult choices to be made, but certainly there can be a drastic reduction in the Green Belt usage.
Okay. Now, both of you describe yourself as independents, but you have formed a political group, the Independent Alliance, at the council. and now you are part of the Residents for Guildford and Villages. Is that going to be a party? And if it is, how will you be able to still describe yourself as independents?
Well, we formed the Independent Alliance in order to show that we could actually provide an effective opposition on the council, and also to make sure that council members who are independent actually got some seats on council committees, because clearly as an individual I got no seat at all. That was vetoed, and even when Bob McShee and Colin came across, we still couldn't get a seat on the planning committee. So it was clear that we had to form a group to actually get a proper representation within the council itself.
Okay, I get that, but what about this new Residents for Guildford and Villages? Is it the party or not?
I don't know whether it is a party. It's not a registered political party. We are independents. Whether Residents for Guildford and Villages supports it, supports independence, is not entirely clear. It's an umbrella group to support independent candidates, and I think that's a very good thing for Guildford and Villages. It gives an umbrella to help independent candidates to stand and hopefully win a few seats.
Yeah, I think it's a means to an end, Martin. You know, we need something like that to help broaden the scope of the independents in Guildford. We alone couldn't do it.
But isn't it going to be confusing for your potential supporters? You know, are they voting for the Independent Alliance? Are they voting for you as individuals, or are they voting for the Residents for Guildford and Villages?
Well, let's look at it straightforwardly. We're all going to be independent. All the candidates will be independent, and we will all be, hopefully, members of the Residents for Guildford and Villages. So that's the way.
And that is not going to become a party?
It may be. We don't know. We really don't know yet.
Okay. When I interviewed you, Tony, and Bob McShee in September, just after his defection from the Conservative group, Bob was clear that there'd be no electoral pacts, but it is now admitted that you're going to have a pact with the Guildford Greenbelt Group, or GGG, and will not be contesting the same seats. How do you explain that?
Well, there's no pact. There is a working relationship with GGG, but there isn't a pact. It may well be that in some seats we will have a candidate there which is in a sense potentially competing for votes with GGG. But the essence of any relationship with GGG is that we are independent. We're independent of one another, and also that we're offering an independent alternative to party politics.
But isn't that semantics, really? Because you have got an agreement of candidates, haven't you? There's no agreement.
There's no agreement. We have a working relationship, as to which wards we're going to stand in, and whether those wards will have two or more independent candidates.
Okay.
There won't be a surplus of candidates between the two parties, let's put it like that. So that if there's two-seat ward...
No, I understand. So you mean there's no pressure to have more than...
No, so there'll be one and one. Yeah.
But I think some people would say that is almost a pact if you're going to agree with them to do that.
Well, it's not an argument really, and if you want to call it a pact, you can call it a pact. It's not what we call it.
Martin. We do have differences between us, undoubtedly, because GGG has been an effective opposition, particularly in relation to the Greenbelt. Independents sit across the town and the villages. Niels Christensen joined us recently, and he represents a town ward.
Okay. Now, in my interview with Council Leader Paul Spooner, he said that his vision for Guildford in 10 or 15 years was a town and a borough that is happier, but that the physical appearance of the town won't have changed much. Do you agree? What is your vision for Guildford in 10 or 15 years?
Well, I hope it will be happier than it is at the moment, because clearly there are problems in Guildford and the villages about housing, about infrastructure, the difficulty of having large amounts of housing without the roads and the network and all the infrastructure. I hope it will be happier, because I think you have to put together the housing and the infrastructure. Particularly if you have large developments, you can't really have a large development without sorting out your roads, your schools, and all the other facilities that you need in a community.
But the villagers aren't going to be happy all the time there's a threat for development near them, are they?
No, they won't. But in a sense, it's a balancing act between housing need, numbers, and where you can legitimately and practically put housing.
What about you, Colin?
I don't think Guildford is happy now, certainly not with the local plan that we've been lumbered with. And there were 80,000 comments made against it, and that was all ignored. The constraints that they could have brought in, they ignored, because this is an 89% green belt in this borough, and that was just pushed by the wayside, whereas Woking included it in their reasons for constraining the numbers. And you take this very village, 600 houses are in Ripley and its surrounding area in the parish. We've got to get over 2,500 new houses within a mile of this spot. What's that going to do to this place? Will people be happy here, will they? I don't think so. I think people will be leaving in their droves.
So you don't think Guildford's going to look the same in 10 or 15 years if these developments take place?
No, not at all.
And what about the town centre? We've got big
They've got
changes.
to master plan it. They must master plan the town centre. They're doing it piecemeal. And
But what I mean is, it's not going to look the same, is it? Because we've got major developments. The station one, for instance, has already been approved.
Yes. Yeah.
Can I, as you know, I've always taken a view on retail that there are too many shops empty. Yes, some of them reopen again, which is good. But I was always doubtful about the original local plan, which proposed a retail-led development in the town centre. That is unrealistic now because of internet shopping, the problems which retailers have. Let's face it, in the last few days they've been talking about Giraffe and LK Bennett going into administration. So the future of retail in the town centre is problematic, and if you have a problem with retail, you need to look at that part of the town centre, as a prospect for major housing development. Can I just mention Tunsgate Quarter? The plan still has a figure for retail which is 3 times as big as Tunsgate Quarter.
Okay, but let's imagine that you have some success in May, and there's a council with no overall control, so you can exercise some influence. How would you change things? What would you do to make the realisation of Guildford in 10 or 15 years improve?
Well, I think to begin with, we will need to see what we can do to the local plan. You know, what's possible, what's legal, what we have to just accept. So that would be a major review.
Because Paul Spooner's on record as saying that future councils will be very constrained by the local plan.
We don't know that. I've asked questions of the inspector, and I believe that the review process is open to a fair degree of flexibility.
Okay, that sounds a bit vague though. You've got no further information on that, or?
It's very hard. There's nothing much in writing on it. But you are supposed to hold a review every 5 years as a maximum figure. You can hold it in less than that.
But the government's not going to allow you to significantly drop the housing figures, for instance, is it?
Well, you could significantly change the buffer figure, or take figures out of the buffer. You don't need a 40% buffer.
I think, sorry Martin, I think it's fair to say that the housing need numbers are likely to come down from the latest hearings and from the latest statistics by about 70 homes a year. So it is a moving position. It's a changing circumstances that housing numbers can come down, the relocation can change because of the decline of retail, and the relocation of housing in the town centre. So there's lots of things up for grabs, and let's face it, there were some major sites proposed in the revised local plan which look as though they went in, and now it looks as though they're going to come back out again.
Okay, but the railway station, that's a lost cause, is it?
Well, it's being discussed with the developers at the moment, so presumably that discussion will have to continue, and we'll see what can be done.
I think it's doubtful. I think it's doubtful that it will change. Solent got a planning permission. The council refused it, but they got the planning permission on appeal. So I would like to think that the Great Wall of Guildford will be changed, but it must be doubtful.
Okay, and who would you blame for that?
Well, obviously the developers, the Network Rail and the developers Solent themselves, for putting in that application of an awful building, a block. But also, in a sense, the council. I'm not sure we took all the points that we could have done against that application going to appeal.
Councillor Spooner blames the inspectorate.
Well, yes, the inspectorate is again a bit of a conundrum. It depends who you get as an inspector, but he is dealt with by constraints, and you have to put your best case forward to perhaps convince him one way or the other.
But do you think it's right that one inspector can make that decision without any kind of appeal?
That's the way it works.
You're not against the system?
You have to accept the practicalities. That's how it works. We can't change it.
Okay.
But I would like to say about the quote you just gave from Councillor Spooner, he may regret walking out on the negotiations when they were taking place.
You mean the negotiations with the
Developers,
yeah. Okay. Now, one of the criticisms of the current council is that they are too secretive. I'd like to explore your view on that. How many of the pink sheets that you see, the classified council papers, really need to be secret in your view?
Not all of them. I think there are quite a lot of them which could be brought into the council and the public domain. I also think that the council leadership tends to bring forward proposals at the 11th hour and the 59th minute. For example, the Ash Bridge development, £22 million, has come in to the Executive Advisory Board, the Advisory Board, with about 3 days' notice, and clearly councillors don't have the time to consider that major development in the way that they should. There's a lot of projects which come in with very little time for councillors to think about them.
And you think that's deliberate?
Yeah. Is it deliberate? I think it's either, dare I say, incompetent, because you shouldn't be bringing major projects into the councillors' consideration at the last minute, or it is perhaps deliberate to get through a major, potentially controversial development without much opposition, because councillors haven't had a chance to think it through.
Let's take the Wisley Garden Village. They knew about that in August. They knew they were going to bid. We only got the details of the bid 2 days before they put it in, and it had to be lifted then from any sort of scrutiny process. So that seems to me to indicate that was definitely intended.
That was put down by, we ought to say, by the managing director to an error on the council officer's part. Do you believe that?
Maybe partly.
Okay. So what does need to be kept secret at the council?
Major financial considerations about where you're going to get the funding, how much it is going to need legal considerations, legal advice, and also the financial estimates and assessments for the future. But I think there is still quite a lot in the pink sheets which ought to be brought into the white sheets.
Yeah.
And I think that really has to be looked at in a new setup for the council. As you may know, Martin, the council has just approved the future Guildford project to change the whole setup of the council and how it deals with residents and how it deals with councillors. And I sincerely hope that councillors who are not on the executive and not in the leadership will have much more participation and involvement in council decisions.
But would you still say there's a culture of secrecy at the council currently?
I would, and I think it's not what actually reaches the pink sheet stage, it's the stuff that doesn't get to the pink sheet stage that we don't hear about until way late in the process.
Okay, and you would change that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, under the name of the Residents for Guildford and Villages, you had your second public meeting last week, and were obviously keen at that meeting, which I attended, to be in listening mode after the criticism at your first meeting. What did you learn about the concerns of the attendees at that meeting?
Well, it was very, as you heard, very far-ranging, wasn't it? There was probably 30...
What are the salient points, though, for you?
I think the fact that people want us to represent local politics from a local angle and not see it as a stepping stone to Westminster, which is currently what we've got, the Guildford Borough Council.
That view was expressed?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was a very listening meeting. We had 3 breakouts where people could discuss their local issues, whether they lived in the town centre.
So when you say breakouts, just to make it clear, you divided the audience into different groups. I think there were 4.
3.
And
There were 4,
there were
right,
4,
yes,
and
yeah.
and then they were in a smaller audience, so you obviously had more talking time.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So there were independent groups
Yeah.
within the meeting who could talk amongst themselves. So you got the chance for everybody to give their opinion, give their views. And it was clear that there was a very big range of views from town centre about housing, about parking, about the bus station, through to the rural villages where you had different emphasis upon Greenbelt. So there's a big range of issues, and that was very good because we were listening to what the residents want, and that to me is the essence of a council which is run by residents, for residents, and which is independent of party politics.
Now, I want you to imagine that you're walking into the bookies and you're going to place a bet on how many seats you're going to get in May. What's your best guess?
I'm not a betting man.
No, but you are in this question, so.
I'd like to think that we got double figures.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's the same.
My words. Exactly.
Okay, and what odds do you think you get on that?
Probably double figures.
Okay. Colin Cross, Tony Reid, thank you very much.
Thank you.